hello everybody. Welcome to the Compass video series. Our hope is that this would be kind of a video podcast style discussion about the Nebraska Child Welfare System, folks that are involved in the child welfare system, foster care and adoption, families in crisis, and how we can work to improve that here in Nebraska, and then also just helping us as a community to understand that a little bit better. I'm Kelly Mast. I'm the Director of Family Services with Compass. I'm also the Associate Pastor at Spirit of Life Church here in Kearney. I've been involved in child welfare for about 22 years, was a foster parent for 14 years, and I've adopted from the Nebraska foster care system. And I have the joy today of having with me Jon Brandt, an associate and friend, that he's an attorney here in the Kearney area. And just to tell you a little bit about him, Jon graduated from UNL Law School, where he clerked for the Attorney General and the Nebraska Solicitor General, managing death penalty appeals and issues related to the Constitution.
Constitution.
There we go. After law school, he then moved back to Kearney to join the law firm that he's currently with, Klein, Brewster, Brandt, and Messersmith. He currently practices litigation, focusing on personal injury, criminal defense, and juvenile court work. He has 3 children, ages 14, 10, and 7.
Yes.
Got him. All right. He's on the board of the Kearney Area Community Foundation, Buffalo County Community Partners, and on the City of Kearney Board of Adjustment. He's also active with St. James Catholic Church since converting about 13 years ago. And you're also a multi-show podcaster, I hear. So I'm sure you're not thinking this, but to me, this is going to feel like a live sort of evaluation of our inaugural episode here.
Cool. I'm happy to be part of it. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us and making time here.
Sure.
Well, let's just kind of diving in, and particularly your role in the Nebraska juvenile court system. I think a lot of people don't know a whole lot about the juvenile court system. When I think your average community member thinks about court, they're thinking about either lawsuits or criminal court. So I'd like to kind of dive into that. But first of all, what kind of drew you personally to pursue the law, and maybe just could you give us a little overview of what it's like to get to where you're at today? What sort of the process looks like?
Sure. So what got me to be a lawyer, I've always felt like a satisfaction in seeing the right thing happen. So I guess you could call it a sense of justice or something. Even as a kid, I really enjoyed seeing the right thing happen in school or otherwise. So, some kids would play basketball, and I certainly did, and play football and things like that. But I made my friends play mock trial, and I made my friends play court. And so we'd sit in our living room, and somebody would be a judge, and we'd make up a little scenario, and we'd sit there for a couple hours and pretend to have court. So it was always kind of in me that I wanted to go be a lawyer. I always felt a connection to it, and my grades in high school were horrible. But thankfully, when I got to college, I started taking things seriously, and my grades got better, and I was like, well, maybe I could do this. So if you want to be a lawyer, the way it starts out is you have to take a thing called the LSAT, which is a test that measures, logic skills, reading comprehension, things like that. And then depending on how you do on that, together with your grades, depends on where you're going to go to law school. So if you get accepted to the law school, you can go there. And then the process for becoming a lawyer, it's a 3-year program. Once you get accepted to law school, the first year they work you to death. And then the second year the first year they scare you to death. The second year they work you to death. And the third year they bore you to death. So that's kind of what they say about law school. It's pretty accurate.
Yeah, we were talking about Grisham novels, and I said that's kind of my impression from some of that and TV shows. So
first year
fairly accurate.
Absolutely accurate. And in my experience there, I mean, at UNL, I have contracts 8 something in the morning, first class. They give you pre-reading that you have to read before, just so you're prepared, because the style of the class is they call on people and kind of put you on the spot. So it's instant anxiety from the time you take the LSAT to the time you pass the bar. And that anxiety level kind of stays with lawyers forever, depending on your practice. But first day of law school, first class contracts, and I hear Professor DeNicola call my name as the first one on the first day. And it hasn't stopped since. But that's the process of law school. So you go to law school, you graduate law school, first year, second year, third year, and then you start preparing for a bar exam, which is a really difficult thing, and it's an intense exam. Some people say it's the hardest exam. I don't know. It's the only one I've taken as far as that level. So then once you pass the bar, then you go through a character and fitness committee with the state bar and the judicial system in the state that you want to practice, and they either approve you or deny you for being a lawyer. And then once you're a lawyer, you can do anything.
Gotcha.
To a certain extent.
Yeah.
You're bound by ethical rules, of course, and then you have update a CLE, continuing legal education, that you have to do every year, around 10 hours generally for folks. So that's the process of becoming a lawyer.
Good. And of that and the different things you've done in the law over the years, what do you enjoy the most? What kind of really invigorates you the most?
Oh,
sitting and reviewing documentation?
No, I was never a big fan of homework.
Yeah.
And being a lawyer is a lot of other people's homework, but that's fine. I mean, it needs to be done. You asked me about satisfaction. So I like seeing the right thing happen, right? That's always been with me, is I want to see the right thing happen, and helping and facilitating that right thing happen, and using my brain or whatever gifts or abilities I've had to make sure the right thing happens, or come up with a unique solution to a problem, so that the parties are satisfied is great. The other side is, handing people big checks. That feels really good.
That's exciting. Yeah.
I mean, that's just part of the thing is being able to hand somebody a big check who's been, injured severely, and getting them some type of compensation for what they've been through. So that's certainly a satisfying part of the job. But seeing the right thing happen generally is what's it for me.
Yeah, that's good. I think for me, that's always been a motivation as well. I think when my staff at Compass have seen me get a little bit riled up, it's when I think back to the times where I feel like a parent who, they've made some poor choices or gotten overwhelmed with life. And so clearly, if they're involved in juvenile court, there's been likely founded child abuse and neglect. But so it's easy to make that parent the scapegoat. But when I've seen those parents not given the opportunity that they need or they deserve, that all of us who know how the system works, and it's easy for us to maybe have hallway conversations or make decisions outside of the room. When I see those kinds of things happening for this parent that doesn't know how the system works, they don't know how the decisions are made. They don't know how even their emotional outburst might affect their case.
Yeah.
When I see that parent sort of not getting their fair opportunities, that's what riles me up, and I think it's that same sense of justice to some degree.
Sure, yeah. Now, and I'm sure we'll get to that, but sometimes it's hard to control the type of environment that is present in juvenile courts, because we have a lot of informal things that happen. The formal part is, it's of course it's in front of a judge, and they have an opportunity to be heard and talk to the judge anytime they come into court. But I think what you're speaking to is kind of the other conversations, the side directions that might happen.
Sure.
That I think can be very frustrating for not only parents, but other people involved who want to see the right thing happen.
Yeah. There's a lot of decision makers that those parents aren't seeing every day: caseworkers and service providers, attorneys, therapists. Yeah, that's good. Well, on that, like I said, I think when most people are thinking about court or the legal system, they're familiar with litigation, they're familiar with criminal law to some degree, mostly because of TV, but less so because of juvenile court. I think probably the average citizen, when they think of juvenile court, they think of a teenager that's getting in trouble. So could you give us a little bit of an overview of Nebraska juvenile court, how it's different from criminal court? Talk to us about that.
Sure. So it all starts with the Constitution. I'm a parent, you're a parent. If the state is going to come and interfere with my relationship with the children, right, or relationship with my child that is constitutionally protected, they got to have a good reason. They can't just come in and decide, I don't want you to see your children anymore. Goodbye. Because I don't like something you said or something like that. That happens in some countries that aren't gifted with this constitutional right to parent your child that we have. It's a beautiful thing, and it's celebrated, and it's also frustrating for people because what you can see happen is maybe some parents who did very horrible things still being given an opportunity to parent their child because of the constitutional right to the child. So it starts with the Constitution. And the overview of the process is there's something that happens. There's an event, right? Or a series of events where there's either child abuse or child neglect.
Yeah.
And that's separate from other types of juvenile cases that deal with the juvenile's behavior. Those
Sure.
are over here, and I assume we're not going to talk about that much today. But that's juvenile's behavior. The juvenile did something wrong that may be considered a crime
Right.
if they weren't a juvenile.
Like those teenagers getting in trouble I was talking about.
Teenagers getting in trouble, typically those are seen under a juvenile court, but that's a separate thing than
Right.
what we're talking about.
Right.
We're talking about child abuse or child neglect. So abuse is physical harm to somebody else generally. There's other ways that you can commit abuse. And then neglect is because of their circumstances, either their home environment is unsanitary, or they're not getting to school like
Sure.
they need to get to, or because of reasons of some type of addiction or something else that parent is suffering from, they won't be able to parent their children effectively. So those are the things that we deal with in that. So there's this event that happens. And the county attorney is involved in the decision making at that point in conjunction with HHS, the Health and Human Services of Nebraska, and law enforcement to decide whether it's safe for those children to stay in that home or whether those children need to be removed and taken into foster care or some other type of environment, some family that might be available to them. So if the county attorney decides to remove those children, a whole bundle of rights come into play. Because the Constitution provides that they need to be able to parent their children. So if the children are removed from the home, which is typically what we're involved in, then it starts a legal proceeding, a juvenile court proceeding, where the parents and attorneys are all brought together. The parents are given attorneys and appointed attorneys to help protect that constitutional right. And they're told, hey, this happened, or it didn't happen. We're going to have to prove it.
Right.
And then we're going to decide what happens with your children. And we need to make sure that you're able to maintain that relationship in a safe way while we're trying to sort out everything else, the legal process. So you start with that. Then the state is under the obligation to prove that there was child abuse or neglect in the juvenile court. And you do that through witnesses and other evidence. Prove that there was child abuse and neglect. And then if the state is successful in proving that, then it starts a whole nother range of proceedings. And the whole other range of proceedings can last years, typically months, but it can last years. And that range there is the dispositional phase, which is, okay, this thing happened. What do we as a society need from you in order for you to demonstrate to us that you can safely and effectively parent your children? So we're going to create a plan. You need to do this. X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
If you have an addiction, you need to stay sober. You need to find a way to stay sober, and it needs to be a permanent thing. If your house is unsanitary, it's not just clean up the house. We need to figure out why your house got so unsanitary so that we can make sure that it doesn't happen again in the future.
Put some pieces in place to help make sure
Absolutely.
routines and structures and things to make sure that their home stays safe.
And that's where Compass comes in, and you do a great job at this, is to seeing the whole picture of this family and what can we do to put them in a position to create a safe and sanitary environment for these children to go back so that parental right can be maintained. So and it has periodic reviews, typically 3 months, sometimes 6 months, sometimes sooner. And then we fight about things over here, right? We fight about whether something's reasonable. Because if your children were taken away from you for an unsanitary home and they're ordering you to go to some type of class on something or other that isn't related necessarily to the cleanliness of the home, it might be unreasonable for those things to be ordered. So you can ask the judge to decide whether what I am ordered to do is reasonable or not. So there's hearings that can happen down there. And then ultimately, if the parents are not successful in reunifying with their children, the state can decide that, well, we've given you a shot. You're not successful, and we need to terminate your parental rights, terminate and sever permanently that constitutional protected right. That's a big thing for a state to do.
It really is.
And So they have to be very sure of that. There's a number of protections that kick in, and a huge court hearing that happens during that process to make sure that the children and their best interests are being taken care of, and that the parents are given their due process and constitutional rights to try and parent the
Sure.
child. So that's a broad overview, but that's typically how it goes. So you have an event, and then you have a remedy for that situation, and either the parents are successful in reunifying or they're not successful, and ultimately there's a termination. And parents can also relinquish, which is a totally appropriate thing. If you are in a position where you cannot parent a child, and it's a wise decision, saying, and incredibly like empathetic decision to say, well, I'm not in a position to do this right now, and I'm not going to be there in the near future. So I'm going to let someone else parent this child, just because I love the child enough to make sure it's safe.
Absolutely.
I think that's an incredible thing for parents to go through and deal with, and so they can relinquish or they can have their rights terminated. And that's the overview of the legal process.
Yeah. Just on that last point, I would agree that that's an incredibly empathetic and selfless decision when it's needed. We talk with our staff and foster families sometimes about that, for a parent, if you put yourself in a parent's shoes who is facing the possibility of their rights being terminated, how much easier it would be to spend the rest of your life saying, that county attorney, that judge, that attorney, that caseworker, they took my kids from me. But instead, having the selflessness, the empathy, the care to make that hard decision to maybe relinquish their rights when necessary. And I think that's heartbreaking for all of us that have been involved in the system very long, that those cases that aren't able to go to reunification, they are necessary in some cases. Another thing that we say around Compass sometimes is, we all celebrate adoptions when they take place, but we have to remember too that an adoption, at least from the foster care system, is also in some ways the death of another family, and it's hard on parents and it's hard on kids.
Yeah.
If they're old enough to understand what's going on, they have things they got to work through with those adoptions and things like that. So that's tough. Well, thank you for that overview. Within that, in the juvenile court system, what kinds of roles have you played over the years?
Sure.
Or maybe what kind of roles are there for attorneys in the juvenile court system?
So for attorneys, you have your prosecutor, who makes kind of the main decisions on behalf of the state and behalf of the county and behalf of the people in general, right? What's best for the state. And then on the other side, you have the parents' attorneys. What's best for this parent? What does this parent want me to do? Those are sometimes separate. But what does this parent want me to do? And then you have parents' attorneys, you have state's attorneys, and then you have guardian ad litems, which are lawyers typically appointed for the children, who are there to be advocates for the children's best interests. Because, you can't take a 6-year-old who just got separated from his parents, shove them up in front of the judge and say, tell them what you want, Billy. It's hard to do. So you need somebody who can identify with the needs and wants of that child and try and advocate for what's in that child's best interest. And, typically in most cases, having a relationship with their parent is in their best interest if they're able to do it. So those are the three roles. Health and Human Services is a caseworker, typically an agent of the state and in the Department of Health and Human Services, who is there to manage the case and make sure that things are being handled appropriately. There's also CASA workers, court-appointed special advocates, who are members of the community doing wonderful things, volunteering their time, trying to be another voice for those children during that process. And then, Health and Human Services, they have attorneys as well. So there's about 3 different roles for attorneys. The prosecutor one's taken. So it's typically a parent attorney or a guardian ad litem. And, not to belabor the point, but the parents, I talked about, the parents can have their best interest might not necessarily be what they want. Well, the parents might be in a position where either they have mental health issues or other things where they might need a guardian ad litem as well. So that person can advocate on the parents' best interest, as well as the attorney advocating for what they want.
Yeah. I remember one of my early cases here in Nebraska. When I moved back to Nebraska, I think there were 7 attorneys in the one case because both parents had an attorney, both parents had a guardian ad litem. The children's guardian ad litem, you had county attorney, you had the DHHS, Department of Health and Human Services, their attorney was involved.
Right.
And
well, the natural reaction to that, which is as a taxpayer, is completely appropriate, which is, why are we paying all these attorneys? Well, we're paying all these attorneys because we're protecting that constitutional right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And when you're protecting constitutional rights, you're not just protecting that person's constitutional rights, you're protecting your constitutional rights. Mm-hmm. Because the state, if they wanted to come and take away my kids, and let's say I wasn't in a position to hire an attorney, I would very much want them to get somebody who could help me through that process. Absolutely. And by having that situation, you're helping preserve that, not only for that individual, but for yourself. And that's a completely natural reaction, but you have to remember that it's for everybody.
Yeah.
Otherwise, bad things happen.
Absolutely. When we talk about when the state or the system gets involved and takes somebody's kids away, incredibly difficult situation, traumatic situation, then the impetus really should be on the state and the system to do everything necessary to protect that family's rights and make it possible, provide every opportunity for that parent to progress, to rehabilitate, so to speak, and prove that they can provide a safe home and get those kids home. It's really on us as a system or a state to provide those opportunities. Now that parents got to do the work, right? Sure. They've got to do the work, and I mean it's hard work, but I think it's our job as a society, as a system, to offer up those opportunities because our state, our system is the one that stepped in and removed those kids. So.
And it's ultimately better for the children, right?
Yeah.
You only get one mom and dad. I mean, I realize that you can be adopted and you can go through this, but we all have that longing and that connection to the parent.
Yeah.
And that's such a big thing that we all innately understand, that I think we understand that it's worth the cost in order to try and make every effort we can to preserve that.
Yeah. Now, I think when people are learning about this, it's easy to sit back and think, well, if these parents made choices or didn't know enough or were dealing with their own issues and needs to such an extent that their children were abused or neglected, shouldn't there be criminal charges every time? Like, shouldn't there be a crime associated with that? So, talk about that.
Sure.
Are there criminal charges?
Sometimes there are.
In these cases.
Again, that's the county attorney's role, is to decide whether what we're dealing with here rises to the level of purposeful criminal act. Right? Neglect, car accidents. Right? That's a neglect standard. That's a negligence standard. I don't think necessarily people should be arrested and put in jail typically for a car accident and your normal everyday car accident. If they're dealing with something either mental health wise or otherwise to the point that their home becomes unsanitary, it might not necessarily need a criminal charge, right? I think that, and our county attorney, at least in Buffalo County, who handles juvenile matters, is incredibly empathetic and has great common sense and can understand that everything isn't a nail that I have to use my hammer for, right? There's other problems associated with, and the greater good and the greater thing for the public is to deal with them in juvenile court as opposed to putting them in jail or putting them on probation. That being said, there's oftentimes possession of illicit substances and certainly physical abuse of a child is going to most likely result in criminal charges, as it probably should, right? And that's something that can be utilized effectively during the case as an extra motivator for some folks and extra resources for some folks to get the help they need to try and reunify with their kids. So the criminal process is a separate process than this juvenile court, but they're both considerations.
Yeah, it's more of a rehabilitative approach, isn't it, than a punitive? Although, of course, within our criminal court system, we're as a society, as a nation, trying to take more rehabilitative approaches even to the criminal court system. But that's really the focus of the juvenile court is meet those needs.
Juvenile court is not designed to be punitive.
Right.
It's designed to rehabilitate, and that's over here in the juvenile delinquent stuff, where it's the juvenile's behavior. It's designed to rehabilitate. But it's the same thing in juvenile abuse and neglect cases. And then the criminal system is designed to punish in addition to rehabilitate.
Yeah.
So there's a punitive aspect. If you harmed a child physically and you're convicted of harming a child, there should be a punitive aspect to that.
Sure.
That's just how it should be. That's that sense of justice going, well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like there should be some type of punishment for that. So there should be a punitive aspect for that. But if your house is unsanitary and you just did it because you've been going through a time, there's been loss in your life, or something, and you're depressed and all those other kinds of things, so your house is unsanitary, that doesn't necessarily need a punitive aspect. You don't need a punitive response from the state for that. And punitive meaning put them in jail or probation or something.
Yeah, assign a sentence. We when I'm talking to new staff to this field, we're talking about that court process a family goes through. In some ways, in the criminal court, when a family or an individual is given a sentence, it's somewhat akin to that case plan you talked about, where this thing happened, like you said, this event of abuse or neglect happened. It's been proven now. And so then they're given a case plan. These are the things that the state, Department of Health and Human Services, the county attorney, and the judge agree. These are the things that need to be accomplished that would give us a confidence that your home is safe and healthy for kids. And so it's in some ways akin to a sentence. Those are the things that because this thing happened, this is the thing you need to complete now.
Yeah.
But of course, it's a rehabilitative approach. We've got lots of help. Service providers like Compass and others, therapists may be involved to help on that process, to help this family again offer up those opportunities for that individual, that parent to progress, meet those benchmarks of safety, health, appropriateness, all that, so that they can hopefully be reunified.
Right.
If they're able to do that work. So I assume as an attorney that that your involvement in juvenile court is not mandated. What draws you to be involved when you could be, writing up contracts with big companies or something like that?
It's generally kind of a youngish lawyer thing to do, because it's a great way to get experience. You get to manage really difficult clients sometimes, and there's great skill that's generated by having to deal with people from different parts of life, and you get a good understanding of how our society works. So and how to help manage those expectations, communicate effectively with all types of folks. So it's a great experience place.
Yeah.
I happen to like it. I find it fulfilling. The GAL role particularly fulfilling, but even the parent's role. When you have a parent who is honest with themselves and understands that they made a mistake or that there was something going on in their life to cause them to be in a bad situation, and really make positive efforts right away to try and get their kids back. That's rewarding too. And so, I'm probably in the point in my career where I'm phasing that out a little bit, but I'm never going to stop it. Yeah. It's always going to be a part of my practice simply because I enjoy it. I find it fulfilling. So that's still going to be there. But something that I was just reminded of, you talk about these problems and how people got here. Everything we're dealing with is a downstream problem, right? These are not upstream issues. Yeah. There's years of things that happened that led these families to the point that they're at. So doing that therapy work, doing the self-reflection and the growth that they need to in order to gain the maturity to properly parent is part of our role too, is helping them get to the point where the services that they need to be connected to actually get them connected. So that's part of our role as well.
Hey friends, thanks for joining us in this video. I want to encourage you to give during Give Where You Live. Open giving is already open, but feel free to join us on the day of Give Where You Live on December 5th. There's a couple different ways for you to donate, so please check out that information in the caption. Thanks.
Kind of your face.
What the purpose? How do you read horrible stories and then keep going?
Yeah,
for sure. I guess.
I've shared, and we've shared at Compass. Many of us at Compass, our faith in Christ is what motivates us to be serving families. I think that you can't spend much time in the Bible or in a good church, hopefully, without hearing God's heart for helping those that are downtrodden, they're struggling, they're needy, that are maybe the disadvantaged, that don't have the connections within the system like we talked about, and they need help. And so that's always been a motivation of mine. I think also that, especially when you're working so closely with these families and these kids, these really, really tough stories, these traumatic stories, that I think you need a deeper well to persevere in the field than just, I want to help kids. I think it requires something deeper than that to persevere in the field and experience longevity, because we see a lot of tough things. We hear a lot of really hard stories. And that's a part of this field. So, just to kind of go a little bit different direction, John. Sure. I think that there's a lot of misconceptions regarding child abuse and neglect. You've touched on it a little bit. Juvenile cases, parents involved in these cases. Maybe what would you want listeners to know about the children involved in the Nebraska Child Welfare System, and then maybe we can also talk about what you'd want them to know about the parents involved in some of the misconceptions.
I think the children are innocent, right? Yeah. The children didn't ask for any of this. They were born into this. They didn't make any choices that led to where they're at. And it's our duty as a society, as a community, to try and help the innocent people that are right around us. Yeah. And, government can spend money on roads, and that's great. And I think we should all agree that government should spend money on children, innocent children who haven't done anything wrong, to do what we can do to help keep them safe. So I guess that's something that I think is important, is that the innocence of children and trying to get them in the right place.
Yeah, before we jump into the parents, and I think there's maybe more misconceptions about the parents that you and I work with. I think one of the things that I would want listeners to know is sometimes in our schools, in our churches, out in our communities, that the kids that we work with are sometimes subconsciously labeled as the bad kids. We often see kids that are dealing with challenging behaviors, dysregulation. In other words, they're not able to control themselves, their bodies, their emotions. And so they're the ones in our classrooms that are a little disruptive. They're the ones in our Sunday schools that are a little hard to manage, that kind of thing. We hear a lot about being trauma informed. We're hearing that more and more, right? And really that means an understanding of how trauma affects these little developing brains and bodies. And it really can lead to the inability to maybe manage their bodies, their emotions, their focus and attention very well. And it's easy to kind of think, this kid hasn't been parented well. This kid needs a firmer hand from those foster parents or those adoptive parents, or of course their biological parents. When when it's a lot more complicated than that, a lot more nuanced than that. They're not bad kids, but we need to come around and help them learn to regulate, learn to maybe calm themselves in ways that kids that haven't experienced this kind of trauma, ways that they don't need that kind of help oftentimes.
Well, okay, so the world that we're talking about isn't easy to talk about.
Yeah.
And it's not easy to shine a light on, and it's not easy to tell everybody about.
Yeah.
So if you don't know what that world is like, either you haven't experienced it or had friends who experienced it or had any kind of connection with it, it's extremely easy to say, well, that kid just needs to sit down and be quiet. And Exactly. He needs a teacher or parent to sit there and, spare the rod, right? And that's something that I think is a misconception that would disappear pretty quickly if they understood where these children were 6 months ago or Absolutely. What they were going home to. It's hard to sit still when you're starving. Right. And you're going to go home and be starving. It's hard to sit still when you go home and you don't know if your mom is going to be there or not. And you don't know whether you're going to be changing diapers for the kids in fourth grade. And you don't know if you're going to have to stay up with them. Or if there's somebody who's actively abusing you in that home. It's tough to stay focused on math.
Absolutely. And to get to a very layman's version of neuroscience, it's really tough for that child's mind and body to learn calming and regulation when 95% of the CPU is focused on survival, focused on what explosion might be happening, what blow up might be happening in the next room over, right?
Yeah.
What state dad or mom might come home in when they're really in that growing up in that fight or flight state. The CPU is focused on the brain power, the computing power is really focused on survival. It's really hard for that little brain, that developing brain, to learn how to calm, to relax, to focus, to manage my body and feelings, things like that. And that's kind of what we're talking about.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm not a therapist. I'm just a lawyer. I don't know any of that world,
Sure.
and I don't pretend to, but I'm a human and I'm a dad.
Yeah.
So I also think there might be something to school as a safe environment. Churches are typically considered a safe environment. So if you're acting up in this safe environment, you're yearning for that connection to some authority figure who's going to treat you safely when you act up, right? They might be very, very quiet at home.
Yeah.
They might not want to be around anybody, but they might act up in school because they want to be parented in a way that's safe, that makes them feel loved. And that's a normal reaction to that yearning that we all have. So I don't know. There's a lot going on. That's why therapy is so important for these children. A good therapist can sit there and work with these kids over a month or over months and try and develop a rapport to help them self-reflect and understand what's going on in their world. And maybe that, what happened to me isn't normal.
Yeah.
And it's not my fault. And I can get beyond that. And when I'm in school, I need to act a little better.
Yeah.
And that's probably a little more effective than the stern militaristic approach. I haven't seen that be effective with these kids.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, what about the parents? Again, I think that maybe more of the misconceptions out in the general community reside around some of the parents that we work with. What kind of misconceptions have you run into in terms of the families that you run into in the child welfare system in juvenile court, or just what would you want listeners to know about these parents?
Well, going back to the downstream problem, right? Those parents were children once.
Yeah.
And those parents were children that we missed 20 or 30 years ago. We didn't do the rehabilitative efforts. We didn't do the connecting with them. We didn't give them a safe and secure environment, maybe. So now's our opportunity to work with them. Now, if they're in the system, now we have the opportunity to help heal that child that didn't get what they needed when they were younger, and try and direct them to be better people and be better parents. And that's ultimately better for taxpayers. That's ultimately better for the community when you have people who are not committing crimes, who are not involved in the drug world, who are making an honest living and paying taxes. And if we can help parents get from where they were to that environment, that serves everybody, especially the children. And it stops it from going on to the next generation of children. So we're planting trees here, right? And it's going to take a long time for those trees to grow and show fruit, but it's worth it because sometimes that fruit is magical, and it would save some child who isn't born yet from having to deal with these kind of things. So the way I view parents are old kids sometimes, and they have their own bundle of issues that you need to try and work through and try and help them be a parent now. Yeah. Sometimes that doesn't work.
I think that's a really grace-filled perspective. I like that because, man, it is so easy to just step back and judge parents that have made some of these mistakes. And again, we've heard some pretty horrific stories over the years, but the vast majority, I would say, the parents that I've worked with in the last 16 years or so here in Nebraska, they want to do better. They wish they were capable of doing better, but often it's situations, scenarios of being overwhelmed, not having the knowledge of the tools that they needed, and then dealing with their own past trauma and mental health issues and all those kinds of things. And there are some more intentional stories that are harder to deal with. But
Sure.
But to step back and say,
and those make the news, right?
Yeah, they do.
Those are the ones that make the news. So you start to think, well, that's everybody in that system. Well, that's not everybody. That's probably 10%
Yeah.
of everybody in this system are the people who did, really horrible things.
Yeah.
And that they're a different track probably than the ones that I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But to step back and say, looking at them as former children that maybe slipped through the cracks,
Yeah.
I think is a great and grace-filled way, rather than a judgmental way to view those parents. I think that's really valuable. And to your point about really building healthier communities, and it's a more fiscally responsible, to look at it in the most practical terms, way to do it. We've talked to legislators and local government employees involved, leaders, I guess, that, man, prevention dollars are so much cheaper than intervention dollars. We live in Nebraska. We're a fairly fiscally conservative state. And so it's maybe not very popular to talk about spending state dollars on, parent training programs or programs where we're getting involved with families way upstream when nothing has yet happened. And yet, if we have a few hours with a family, I've seen teenagers that are struggling to get to school, and they're on the doorstep of the juvenile court system because of truancy or running away or whatever. And I've seen, some of our staff getting into those homes in a voluntary basis and spend a few hours with that family and see those kids back into school, maybe connected with a therapist, back on track, the family communicating better. That is way, way cheaper than when we're paying a foster parent for the care of that child, when we've got attorneys involved advocating for the parents and the kids. We're paying for Medicaid, maybe we're doing visitation, we're doing parent training now. Those prevention dollars are way, way cheaper than the intervention dollars. So that's good.
No, completely agree. And I think about it like the typical person in this area. We don't run to the doctor very easily,
Mm-hmm.
right? It takes us a little bit to decide that it's bad enough. You got to see the bone before you decide that you're going to go to the doctor. So if I just have a sniffle and maybe I'm out for a couple days, I'm not going to go see the doctor, because there's this whole attitude of either toughing it out and I'm stronger than this and not preventing something bad from happening. And that's what we need to do, is we need to probably put as much effort into prevention as we can. Now, as an attorney, I have a little bit of an issue with that, because you're involving yourselves without a court system in these people's lives, right? And you're interfering with that parent-child relationship, and there's no oversight from a judge, and there's nobody to protect them legally. So, I think it's important, that role, but there has to be some maybe good rules in the voluntary nature of those proceedings. Because oftentimes it's like, if you don't do this, I'm going to take your kids. Okay, I get it, but that's coercion.
Yeah,
right?
not very voluntary.
It's coercion. It's not a long-term solution to those situations, because then the second you're out, well, we're back to the same problems sometimes.
Yeah. And I think that's where, if you don't know, there's if folks don't know, I mean, there are a number of agencies around our communities that are offering help to families, aside from the Department of Health and Human Services.
Yes.
And we need to invest in those, because those are the ones, they really truly are voluntary. There is not that coercive message that is sometimes there or implied there that can sometimes be sort of accompanying involvement with DHHS even before kids are removed, that we're offering these services, and sometimes it can feel like, if you don't participate, we may have to remove your kids. That's not very voluntary. But these other organizations out there, apart from DHHS, that can offer some help and support, education to families, that really are voluntary. And that's where a lot of those prevention resources are at, where they're voluntary. Families don't have to get involved. Because you're absolutely right. When the state is truly involved with this family, or they've had to remove their kids, we want due process there.
Yeah.
We want judicial oversight for sure, to protect the society we built.
But I mean, I used to be on the Jubilee Center board, and the work that organization does is like what we were talking about. It's feeding and clothing youth. And if I'm a parent and I don't know what they do there, or I'm not connected with that, I might get to the level of needing a voluntary case or having my children potentially be removed when it could have been solved by simply knowing, well, you can go here to get food for a while if you need it, or you can go here to get clothes if your kids need clothes, rather than having them go on the same thing to school every day. So that's, I think, the education and awareness of those resources in the community to that population is probably something we could do better at.
Yeah, good. What about at a state or local level? You've been working within the Nebraska juvenile court system for a while now. What are some things maybe at the state and local level that you'd love to see improved, flipped on its head? Talk to us about that.
I think there needs to be more, I'd call it clay in the joints when it comes to HHS spending. I understand we want to keep track of every dollar, and I understand we don't want it to be wasted. That's a very legitimate thing.
Sure.
If I gave my 14-year-old $20 to go to the movies, I want to make sure that he's, just buying things that are appropriate and not, getting too much candy or anything like that. So I'd want to monitor that as well. This is important. You have the Department of Health and Human Services, which is the largest budget in the state by far, and it's the largest percentage of the budget. And then you have things that are holding up families from receiving the services that they need that are not large, that are $15, that are $20, or having a family that doesn't have a bed for a child. And so they go to a wonderful resource that you provide, the care portal, right? That you're involved in. And so going from those types of situations and relying on the care portal as opposed to just buying the bed doesn't make sense to me. We were talking off camera about those places where we can maybe apply a few dollars so that family can help themselves. I think those are incredibly, incredibly valuable. Just remove a barrier. For you and I, wouldn't be a barrier, but for a family that's really living paycheck to paycheck really is. And if we can meet that need, sometimes that means a set of used bunk beds or a repair to a car or a gas voucher, so that then that family can help themselves is incredibly valuable and just speeds things up for everybody. And so that's what I think could change on the state level is having that clay in the joints to go, okay, we have these things. If you sign this form for the $15 thing, and I can have a worker go and make sure you use it for gas, whatever. There's some oversight that you can come up with to solve the problem and help them help themselves. I think that makes sense. On a local level, foster parents. Do you know how hard it is to get a 16-year-old boy with behavioral issues placed? They're all in Omaha. Yeah, of course you do. But I mean, I'm just saying, like you generally. If you're a 16-year-old boy and you're in central or western Nebraska and you have behavioral issues and you can't go home, you're going to go to Omaha. And you're likely going to be going to North Omaha because that's where the resources are available to house them. And that's, not necessarily that North Omaha is a bad thing, but that impacts that family relationship. That impacts that person's ability to see their parent, and it forces that parent to go to Omaha, which they sometimes out here, people have never been to Omaha. So it's a ways for them to go, and it's hard to keep that relationship when they're so far away. So I think if there could be someone or some entity or something that would be willing to foster that age group, I think beautiful things could happen in the community. So on a local level, that's what I'd say. And there should be state incentives to do that too, right?
Absolutely.
Because is it really in our fiscal responsibility nature to have a child placed in Omaha when they could be closer and have to pay for gas vouchers and things like that? That doesn't make much fiscal sense. So having them be local, there may be some tax incentives or otherwise things that they could do to help, promote that. So I would hope that could happen because there's a lack of therapists and there's a lack of foster parents in this area.
Absolutely. Yeah. We as a foster care agency where we recruit, train, and then support foster families, we are getting in central Nebraska, we are getting numerous referrals every day for teenagers, maybe with challenging behaviors because of what they've experienced. But we're getting those referrals every day, multiple a day, often from all the way across the state where they're looking. And then if you've got siblings, much, even more difficult for placement.
And you speak to that, like, not only does the Constitution protect that parent-child relationship, it protects that sibling relationship.
Yep.
So the Constitution has a 16-year-old brother and a 10-year-old sister or a 10-year-old brother or whatever, and that whole string of siblings, they might have to be placed in different areas. And now we have to facilitate that relationship as well.
Absolutely.
Whereas if we had foster placement or something local where they could all be together, or at least closer, that would be in the best interest of everybody, I think.
Yeah, agreed. And so to that point, and probably closely related, last question that I've got here: what could our communities, our businesses, our churches do to help build stronger families, help keep kids safe? What are some things that you'd love to see? Because I think our communities, our broader communities, are very unaware in a lot of ways to the challenges that these families are facing, or the numbers of kids in foster care right in their areas. And so that's part of what we want to do here, is make people a little bit more aware of what's going on right here in the Kearney area, but really, in every community. So what could businesses, communities, churches, what could they do to help make families stronger, kids safer?
Well, aside from helping wonderful organizations like Compass, which I am financially supporting wonderful organizations like Compass, I think that would be a wonderful thing that people could do. I also think they could open their houses and homes and just minds to the possibility of fostering children. I think that would be a beautiful thing that they could also do, and working the local and state government to try and help facilitate that environment. But I'll tell you what I tell when I'm at Guardian Ad Litem and I go meet with foster parents, and I tell them, here's my rules, right? Love them and keep them safe.
Yeah.
And tell me if something's weird, if something feels off. Those are the 3 rules that I have. And I think a lot of your question, and is what everybody can do, is we have these innocent children in our backyard. And if we can just love them and try and take care of them, I think that would probably solve the problem. And love in the sense that agape love, right? That charitable goodness that you want to give to those children and show them something that they may never have received. You think of organizations like Royal Family Kids, and they do the camp every year. And I was speaking to somebody a month ago about how that camp, that might be the greatest thing that kid does every summer.
Absolutely.
For a week. He gets to go be normal and have camp experiences. We're talking, different statuses or different levels in society. You're talking about going to Disney World, and you're talking to go on beach vacations and things like that. And that's your big family vacation. Well, these kids only get that. So if you're able to financially support or otherwise help that organization, you're giving something to that child that is as big as Disney World.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's great. I love that. And you mentioned earlier, I think, we know that asking a family to open their home to be a foster parent, that's a pretty tall step. It's a very valuable step, but it's pretty tall. You mentioned earlier being a CASA advocate, court-appointed special advocate. That's a way, volunteer role, not many hours a month, where somebody can really step in and be an advocate for a kid and make a real difference. Another thing that we talk about at Compass is signing up to be a respite parent with just a little bit of guidance from an organization, sign in a couple of forms, and you can get to know some really great kids and make an impact on their life. You can give some really hardworking foster parents a break with a pretty low commitment. And so that's a couple of things I would say too. So that's great, John. I really appreciate it. I didn't tell you this before, but I ran into you at a Kearney High theater production, and I just thought, I need to have John on. We've worked several cases together, and I've always found you to be just really invested in the families that you're working with, thoughtful, and really working with the teams involved with your cases. And not every attorney I've worked with has been like that. I've just really appreciated your thoughtfulness, cooperation, and real investment with the families. So thank you for that. And thank you for your time being on today.
Thank you very much. And thank you for doing this. I think it'll benefit everybody. I hope so.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. Hopefully this helped you to be a little bit more aware and have a greater understanding of the Nebraska Child Welfare System. Take care.